Hello everyone, hope you are doing good. I welcome you all to the fourth lecture of this E614. In the last time we met, uh, we discussed about atoms in a periodic lattice. We discussed how the electrons in such periodic lattice behave, and then we showed that some gaps in the energy wave vector dispersion relationship happens because of the interference between electrons moving on the positive x-axis and positive y-axis in a one-dimensional lattice, right? So we saw that, let's say, if we have two atoms like this, of course it's going periodically in positive x and negative x-axis. You have what is called as a gap, predominantly close to the zone boundary. So this was called as the zone boundary, and the zone we refer to a Brillouin zone, and the Brillouin zone is the first Wigner-Seitz lattice, and Wigner-Seitz is obtained that if you have an atomic arrangement, you draw the lattice vectors to the nearby atoms and then draw the perpendicular bisector, right? If I have another atom here, I get another perpendicular bisector like this, giving you the Wigner-Seitz lattice in this form. Right? This is what we saw last time, and the reason why we draw perpendicular bisectors is because if this is k equal to 0 and this is k equal to 2 pi by a, you have the zone boundary at pi by a, exact half of the lattice parameter, right? In the reciprocal lattice space, of course. However, in reality, right, you have the lattices are all three-dimensional, right? And the atomic potentials are not as simple as what we have taken. So typically, people go to all elaborate methods to actually calculate the complete band structure, is what they call the E versus K relationship for all K values is called as a complete band structure. So one such example is here. So you will be seeing these band structures now and again many times if you are working in solid state devices. So let's take some time to understand what this band structure is, what is being calculated, and what needs to be looked at. So let us take one of them and understand what the lines mean, what is the x and the y axis, and so forth. The y axis is simple. So the y axis is simply the energy. Y axis is just energy, which is very similar to what we saw before. And the x axis has these weird numbers, right? So this L, gamma, and x, all these things are called as the high symmetry points. So we take the Brillouin zone. The Brillouin zone has certain high symmetry points. They are defined in 3 dimension like this. So basically, gamma is 0, 0, 0. That's the center of this axis, right? And x is 2 pi by a, 0, 0, 1. So that means that it is along one of the directions. It can be 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, and so forth. Okay? And k is equal to 2 pi by 3, 3 pi by. So these things, they differ quite a lot on what is the crystal lattice that you think about, but then they are typically drawn along certain high symmetry points. And these things, L, tau, L, gamma, and x are such high symmetry points. And you also have various directions, right? 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0. 1, 0, 0 is these are all Miller indices, right? So they are along the 100 planes. And each of these lines that you see here, these are called as the dispersion lines. These are the E versus K that you always saw, right? And each point in this line can have 2 electrons, right? This is because of the spins and Pauli's exclusion principle and fermions ensure that there can be only 2 spin values, plus half and minus half. So each point has one unique energy, right? And that energy can take only 2 electrons. So then why do we have several lines? The origin of several lines comes from the fact that you have several bands. So from lowest energy, you start filling you start filling each of the bands depending upon the number of electrons that you have in the system. And at 0 Kelvin, the band which is occupied is called as the valence band. That is, the valence band is the last band that is occupied at 0 Kelvin. So let me just write it down because it's an important definition. Is the last band that is occupied at 0 Kelvin, right? And the gap between this last band and the next band is called as a band gap. This is the energy gap. Between the last occupied band and the next. In the previous section, we saw that there needs to be a band gap, or we prove the existence of a band gap if you have a periodic lattice. And here we see that at 0 Kelvin, you start filling the bands, and the bands which was last occupied is called as the valence band, and the next band is called as the conduction band, right? However, there is nothing to say that the last band is completely occupied or partially occupied, right? And that is important because if the last band is completely occupied, we call them as insulators, and if the last band is partially occupied, then we call them as metals. So from where does this distinction come? So the reason for that is, so let's go back to this. So if the valence band is completely occupied, it's either a semiconductor or an insulator. We will come to this particular scenario again, but if it is incompletely occupied, if it's partially occupied, then it's a metal. Though this seems arbitrary, the reason it's a metal is because, let us say that I have a band and it is just partially occupied, in the sense that, so let us say that all the energy levels below this is occupied and all the energy levels here are unoccupied. If there is no real distinction or delineation between the unoccupied and occupied energy levels, then when you apply a small electric field or somehow so think about it, right? So I'm going to draw this, and as we saw before, if this is e power I k plus x and this is e power minus I kx. So if there is no external applied potential, you have equal number of electrons moving in the negative x direction and positive x direction, such that there is no net electron movement in any side. Now if you apply some potential bias, you can in principle increase infinitesimally small population on the right and remove the small population on the left, right? If you do like this, then there is a net motion of electrons along the right, which is what is the origin of current. This is possible only if you have states very close or in the neighborhood of the energy level till which it was filled at 0 Kelvin, right? So this is the energy level filled till 0 Kelvin. So any small increase in potential can change the population distribution such that there is net motion of electrons towards one direction in which there is current. Now this is possible only if there is states in the neighborhood of the energy level which was filled at 0 K, right? If let us say that you have something like and all the levels till this is filled, because there is a gap here, you will not have a very small potential being able to change the electronic distribution largely such that you have a current, right? Now if this gap is much larger than kBT, or the temperature which is under consideration, right, it is called as an insulator. If this gap is almost equivalent or close to kBT, then we call it as a semiconductor. This is to say that any electron which is occupied here can be given sufficient energy, or even just a little bit of energy is what it needs to jump from here to here, and then we can have current and all sorts of behavior, right? So this, my friends, is the delineation between an insulator, a metal, and a semiconductor, which we can derive from the band structure. But still, we have been a little bit heuristic when we said that the last band is being completely filled and last band being empty and so forth, right? So let us go back to this picture, which is pretty nice in the sense that if this is the zone boundary, right? This is the zone boundary, and between this zone boundary we have the length of 2 pi by a. We are still in one dimension, and we said that each point in this line, right, can take 2 electrons. Though we have drawn this continuously, this we will deal in the next class, that this line is not actually continuous. Remember, this is K versus E, right? This K versus E, this K is not continuous. There is a small resolution del K which is not infinitesimally small, which has a particular resolution. So for each del K will determine how many electrons that can stay there, which is called as a density of states, which we will deal in the next class. But how many such del K's are available here between this 0 to pi by a? We will show that this number of such points along this line is equal to the number of unit cells in the volume that we are talking about. Let us say that if I take a cube which is 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, right, some cube of silicon, or each of them being 1 centimeter, and if I divide this particular cube into unit cells of silicon, and that N is 1 centimeter cube by the unit volume of silicon. Right? This will be some huge number, something of the order of 10 power 23, some more. Right? Something of some huge number of unit cells is what you will see. That many small points is what you will have in these lines. And if this N number of such unit cells, right, turns out to be odd, right? So, and each of the unit cell has one electron into one electron. If this product N into number of electrons in the cell, if this is odd, you can automatically tell that the last band is only partially filled, right? Because each point in this have 2 electrons and the number of electrons into number of cells is an odd number. So obviously this band is partially filled. So whenever you have this combination, if number of electrons into number of unit cells, or if the number of electrons is just odd, if you have 1 electron per unit cell, and if you have n unit cells, you will always have a band structure, you will always have a metal. You can easily see why the first elements of the group periodic table are metals. Right? We also saw, when we saw lattice and its structure, that if you have a lattice with a motif, right, we saw that FCC or elements like silicon, gallium arsenide, gallium nitride, germanium, so on, they crystallize in the structure of 2 interpenetrating FCCs. Do you remember us? Do you remember this? Right? So we always saw that these guys, right, and there are many such semiconductors, there are many such materials which crystallize as a form of FCC with a motif. In the sense, this N is actually 2N, because you have 2 lattices which are interpenetrating. You have 2 unit cells which are actually interpenetrating. And this 2N just directly makes this particular number as even into number of electrons. Even if this number of electrons is an odd number, this combination always makes it even. Right? So this makes that most of these combinations to have the valence band completely being filled. And such situations, they can either be an insulator or a semiconductor, depending upon the conditions that we previously saw. So any structure which has an FCC with a motif, similarly, silicon, gallium arsenide, gallium nitride, germanium, zinc sulfide, there is a huge list of semiconductors which form FCC with a motif, and they all are semiconductors because of the fact that at 0 Kelvin their valence bands are completely filled. You also have materials like silicon dioxide, hafnium oxide, silicon carbide, gallium nitride. So basically there are materials like silicon carbide, silicon dioxide. There's also not this sodium, gallium nitride and such, which have band gaps much larger than the energy in the temperature, that they act almost like insulators. Right? So in addition to this important aspect of differentiating between a semiconductor, insulator and a metal, the band structure also has importance in optical characteristics of these materials. Let's see, once again go back to this band structure that we saw. So we saw that this is the valence band. This is the valence band, right? And this is the conduction. And once again, just to repeat myself, at 0 Kelvin the valence band is completely filled and the conduction band is completely empty. If the topmost energy of the valence band and the bottommost energy of the conduction band are in the straight line, they are called as direct band gap semiconductors. So this is a direct band gap, and this is silicon, this is germanium, right? And these two are indirect, right? You can automatically see this. Though this seems to be direct, but then the smallest energy is still indirect, right? So germanium is a little bit tricky in that sense. The reason why this is important is because of its optical properties, and we will study a little bit further as to why this is necessary. That the difference in k vector, the difference in x direction between the topmost of the valence band and the bottommost of the conduction band is very much important when we look at optical absorption emission characteristics. But for now, let us just stick with this definition, that if the bottommost of the conduction band and topmost of the valence band are in the same line or at very close k vector proximity, it is called as a direct band, and otherwise it is called as an indirect band. So with this, there is another definition which is of crucial importance for solid state physics, which is called as an effective mass. So we saw the treatment of a free electron, right? So a free electron has a Schrodinger equation as h bar square del square by 2m, psi is E psi, and E is equal to h bar square k square by 2m, where m is the mass of the electron, which is free, right? But now we have actually kind of gotten away from the free electron scenario, and then we are talking about electrons which are in a periodic lattice. So when you deal electrons like this, now the total force that acts on the electron is a force which is from the periodic lattice, right? Plus there are some forces which are external to it. In any of these cases, right, we see that even in our previous calculations, we see that the E versus K is almost a parabola, other than the places where they are very close to the zone boundary, right? So let's go back to this. If you see the gallium arsenide, right, till the point it is here, right, very close to this topmost of the valence band, for some reason it is still a parabola. It is still a sort of a free electron, and then has some changes afterwards. Right? So the easiest way to handle a non-free an electron is to say that it acts almost like a free electron, right, with a mass which is slightly different. So what they did was to define something called as an effective mass. An effective mass was defined as h bar square by d square E by dk square. So you can easily see that if I take this particular equation, and differentiate it twice, I can see that this is easily defined in the same way. So all I need is the relationship between E and K, and I have a definition of a mass. And why is this very important? Because the actual, in any scenario, whatever force that I apply is E times E, where E is the electric field, right? If I apply an electric field, I know what is the force, and if I know the force, then I can guess the velocity, right? It is dp by dt. So given the force, I know what is the velocity. If I know the velocity, I know the current. So a fair idea of mass can give us what will be the amount of current for a given potential, which is what most of the times we deal with in a semiconductor, right? We apply a potential, we want to guess what's the current. Right? So let's go back to this. So given a dispersion relation like this, given a relation between E versus K, if I know the slope, I know the mass. And larger the slope is, smaller the mass is. Right? So if you see here, let us say the bottommost conduction band in silicon is here. Right? If I compare this line with this line, right, I can easily see that the gallium arsenide has a much higher slope than silicon, right? And that is the reason why the mass of the electron in gallium arsenide is smaller than the mass of the electron in silicon. This is something that you will have to remember, because this explains why gallium arsenide has some very good characteristics in comparison to silicon. So the mass of the electron, or the effective mass in gallium arsenide, is smaller than the effective mass in silicon. Now, if we compare the effective mass of the conduction band and the valence band, you can see that as we change the K, right? As we change the K, you have a positive dE by dk in the conduction band, and you have a negative dE by dk in the valence band, right? In conduction band, we have positive dE by dk, or d square E by dk square, and in valence band we have negative d square E by dk square. It's obvious, right? If you see here, the valence band has a decreasing energy, whereas the conduction band has an increasing energy, right, as K increases. So this leads to a fact that the mass of the electron is positive in conduction band and it is negative in valence band. Well, negative mass is something which we really do not have a hold for, right? We do not really appreciate what is negative mass. So what we do is, typically mass appears along with charge whenever we are talking about current, and hence we take that the conduction band has particles which has the opposite charge of an electron, and hence we call them holes. The main reason for them is that they have a negative mass, or negative second gradient of energy versus K, which gives them a kind of a feel of having a positive charge, whereas electrons have negative charge. Right? Therefore, we have holes which are positively charged. With this brief and an important introduction of holes, we will leave the topic of holes for now. We will come back to it when we actually deal holes in depth. We will treat one final aspect of the band, or the band gap, is its temperature dependence. In addition to just the fact that the population of electrons depend on temperature, because till now we have spoken only about the population at 0 Kelvin, where the valence band is completely filled and the conduction band is empty. However, the temperature has a direct effect on the band structure itself, and for most semiconductors it is shown that the temperature dependence or the band gap at temperature T is band gap at 0 temperature minus alpha T square by T plus beta, where alpha and beta are constants. So basically the temperature decreases as you go higher and higher temperature. The main reason for such a behavior is due to the fact that the lattice constants itself change as the temperature changes. Right? As you go higher and higher temperatures, you have an expansion in the material. The basic lattice constants itself change, and it is those changes in the lattice constants which give you this particular relationship between the band gap at 0 Kelvin and band gap at temperature T. Right? And this relationship is actually empirically determined. One such plot is here. So we know that the band gap of gallium arsenide is larger than the band gap of silicon, and gallium arsenide is a direct band gap semiconductor, whereas silicon is an indirect band gap semiconductor that we saw. And these three important materials, and you see that as temperature increases, the band gap reduces, and it has this kind of a temperature profile which is non-linear. Right? So with this we will stop today, and then we will deal tomorrow, or the next time we meet we will talk about the density of states that we just mildly touched upon today. It has important bearings on several aspects of, let us say, optical properties, electronic properties. What happens if you apply potential bias and so forth. Okay, so we stop the lecture for now today. Thank you. Bye bye.